Welcome to today's deep dive. This one's just for you. We're going to be exploring empathy and how it plays a part in poverty. Our guide is The Empathy Fix, a book by Keetie Roelen. It's interesting how she combines personal stories and scientific findings with what's happening worldwide.
I like how Roelen focuses on the people. She doesn't just throw statistics at us. Instead, we meet people who are struggling with poverty and those who are trying to make things better.
Definitely. Like Shaquille, he's a community worker in Dhaka who works with people like Raisa, a woman dealing with poverty and an abusive husband. What struck me was how Shaquille does more than just charity work.
He does.
He really listens to Raisa, he gives her practical advice, and most importantly, he gives her hope.
That's a great example of the three core components of empathy that Roelen talks about: understanding, feeling, and acting. Shaquille doesn't just get what Raisa's going through. He actually feels her pain and does something to help her.
It's a really powerful example of empathy in action. Now, can we talk about the history of empathy for a minute? I saw that Roelen mentions philosophers like David Hume and Adam Smith, who looked into how we recognize and share feelings.
Right, although people have been talking about empathy for centuries. There's a renewed interest in it these days across different fields. But here's the thing, there's also a worrying trend. Studies are showing that empathy is declining, especially among younger generations.
Wow.
Roelen thinks that this disconnect from other people's struggles might be because of changes in society, increased pressure on people, and the emphasis on individual success over the well-being of everyone.
That's concerning. So let's look at the science behind empathy then. I thought Roland's explanation of effective empathy was fascinating. Like when we automatically wince when we see someone get hurt.
Exactly.
Like we feel their pain.
Right. Roelen describes this interesting neuroscience experiment where women's brains actually lit up with pain signals when their partners were given electric shocks.
It's incredible to think that our brains have an actual empathy circuit. Does that mean people who struggle with empathy have something wrong with their brains?
Not really. Roelen is careful to say that a lack of empathy isn't usually because of a physical problem with the brain. External factors and how we're raised seem to have a bigger influence.
So that brings us to tribalism, which Roelen talks about using the example of how the media covers Ukrainian refugees. She says that we tend to have more empathy for people we see as similar to ourselves.
That's right. Tribalism is our tendency to favor our own group and see other groups as different or even dangerous.
Oh, I see.
This creates divisions and makes it harder to see the shared humanity in all people.
Can you explain tribalism a little more for me?
Sure. Imagine if you truly believed that all swans were white. You would mostly notice the white swans and wouldn't pay attention to any evidence of black swans. It's like that with poverty, too. We tend to see what confirms our existing beliefs, even if those beliefs are wrong.
Right, I get it. We often fall into confirmation bias, looking for information that supports what we already think about poverty instead of questioning those ideas. Roelen uses a funny anecdote about a Daewoo Matiz car to show this. I loved that story about Bart's mom and how she was convinced that the Daewoo Matiz was a popular car just because she kept seeing them everywhere.
Oh yeah, it's a great example.
It shows how confirmation bias works. We subconsciously filter information to fit with what we already believe, even when those beliefs are flawed. This selective perception helps explain why stereotypes about poverty stick around, even though there's evidence that contradicts them. It's as if our brains are hardwired to look for confirmation rather than challenge our assumptions.
Exactly. Now, Roelen also introduces the idea of the cognitive tax of poverty. To explain this, she talks about her own experience trying to get groceries delivered online during COVID-19. At first, it seems unrelated, but she uses it as a way to understand how poverty can lead to cognitive overload.
So it's not just about not having enough money, but the constant mental strain of dealing with scarcity, which can make it harder to make decisions and solve problems. So it's not about intelligence, but about mental energy.
You got it.
Okay.
Think of your mental energy like a computer with limited processing power. For people dealing with poverty, this computer is always running multiple programs, worries about money, housing, food, childcare, and so many other stressors. This doesn't leave much processing power for anything else.
It gets in the way of thinking clearly and planning electively.
Yeah.
She uses that snow globe analogy, right?
Yeah.
If our mental bandwidth is like a snow globe, for those in poverty, their snow globe is constantly swirling with anxieties. It doesn't leave much room for peace or clarity.
Exactly. And to back this up, Roelen talks about research experiments done in New Jersey and Tamil Nadu.
Oh, interesting.
They show how financial scarcity measurably impacts cognitive performance. In both studies, people facing financial pressure did worse on cognitive tests, showing how poverty affects the mind.
So they're basically always in tunnel vision mode. It's hard to see the big picture or think about long-term consequences. But is there a risk to putting it this way? Doesn't saying that poverty affects cognitive function sound like we're saying people in poverty are less intelligent?
That's a good point, and Roelen addresses it directly. She's clear that it's not about intelligence, but about the circumstances in which decisions are made. Imagine trying to make important life choices when your mind is full of anxieties about feeding your family or keeping a roof over their heads.
I see.
These anxieties create mental limits that make it hard to think strategically or consider long-term consequences.
It's like poverty itself puts a burden on the mind, making it hard to think broadly. This makes me think about that common idea that people in poverty make irrational financial choices. Is Roelen suggesting that those choices actually make sense given their situations?
Exactly. She argues that while these choices might seem irrational to someone looking from the outside, they often have a hidden logic when you consider the individual's context.
And to illustrate this, she shares the story of Laura in New Zealand, who used buy now, pay later schemes to manage the costs of raising kids.
Right.
Laura's choice, even though it could lead to debt, shows the tough choices people in poverty face when trying to provide for their families.
Exactly. And Roelen gives another interesting example. Tanzanian families buying food in small amounts, even though it costs more.
Oh, really?
This might seem strange, but it's a way for them to manage their limited resources, avoid waste, and control how much food they use at home.
So what we might see as bad financial judgment is actually a calculated survival strategy. It reminds us that we can't judge financial decisions without understanding the whole picture. It's a strong reminder to check our assumptions before we jump to conclusions.
Definitely. This idea of hidden logic connects to another concept that Roelen explores, the poverty premium. She explains how people in poverty often pay more for basic things like goods and services, which makes their financial struggles even worse. An example of this is prepayment meters for utilities. They often have higher rates than regular billing.
I've heard of those. They disproportionately affect low-income households who might not have good credit or the money for a deposit to get regular billing. It's a classic example of how the system keeps inequality going, even in something as basic as having access to utilities.
Exactly. And Roelen shares this sad story of Gemma, a woman who can't afford to heat her home because her prepayment meter costs so much. She has arthritis. It really shows how the poverty premium can trap people in a cycle of hardship.
It reminds us that poverty is often about dealing with a system that works against you, even when it comes to basic needs.
Exactly. Roelen draws on research from Fair by Design and the University of Bristol.
Right.
They estimate that almost all low-income households in the UK experience at least one type of poverty premium. And this premium doesn't just hurt individuals, it negatively impacts entire communities, taking money away from local economies and slowing down overall progress.
So the poverty premium keeps individuals and communities stuck in financial hardship. What I find particularly interesting is how Roelen includes her own experiences in her analysis. She talks about feeling shame.
Right. She talks about feeling shame during a focus group discussion about blushing.
Wow.
This seemingly random story helps us understand the widespread shame associated with poverty.
It's an interesting comparison. Most people experience shame at some point, but it seems to be a heavier burden for those facing social and economic disadvantage.
Exactly. And she introduces Stephanie, a young mother.
Okay.
Stephanie faced a lot of judgment and negative stereotypes about people receiving welfare. Her experience shows how shame can lead to self-blame, which makes it harder to break free from poverty.
It sounds like all the negativity from society wears people down, creating this awful cycle.
You're right. And this is where internalization comes in. Stephanie internalized those negative messages she received, making her feel worthless and hopeless. The shame of poverty, along with the stigma of getting help, created a huge obstacle for her.
It's like a psychological trap. Internalizing those messages can make you feel hopeless, making it even harder to see a better future. Roelen's experience in Haiti really highlights the deep psychological impact of poverty, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Her encounter with Swamen, a woman trying to survive in poverty, shows the huge emotional impact of deprivation. Swamen felt worthless. She believed she had nothing good to offer, and that really shows how much poverty can crush self-esteem and mental well-being.
It's like poverty itself becomes a source of shame, making people feel less worthy and believe they don't deserve better.
Exactly. Roelen then connects the shame and stigma of poverty to the concept of learned helplessness.
Can you explain learned helplessness to our listeners?
Sure. Imagine facing constant setbacks and failures no matter how hard you try. You might eventually start to believe you have no control over your life, like no matter what you do, the outcome won't change. This is learned helplessness, a feeling of giving up and not caring anymore, which can come from dealing with tough situations for a long time.
So in the context of poverty, this learned helplessness can lead to despair and make it harder to escape hardship.
Exactly. It's like being trapped in a maze where the walls are made of shame and self-doubt.
It's hard to see a way out.
Yes. Roelen argues that addressing the psychological impact of poverty is just as important as addressing their material needs.
It's recognizing that poverty affects more than just someone's finances. It impacts their whole outlook on life, their self-worth, and their ability to see a better future. To illustrate this, she talks about Lee, a big issue vendor who avoids selling in a certain area because he doesn't want to run into people he knows.
Lee's choice, while maybe not making sense financially, shows how strong shame can be. He prioritizes his dignity over making more money. This highlights how shame can lead people to make choices that, without realizing it, keep them in poverty.
It's a powerful example of how shame can lead to withdrawal and isolation, which then further isolates individuals from potential sources of support and opportunities.
Right.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. Roelen connects this to our basic fight or flight response triggered by feelings of shame. In Lee's case, his flight response makes him avoid a potentially profitable area, demonstrating how shame can limit access to resources and opportunities.
So, it seems we've come across a rather difficult situation. While we often aim to encourage personal responsibility, understanding the psychological weight of poverty shows the limitations of that approach.
Definitely. Roelen challenges us to really think about the effects of shame, stigma, and learned helplessness, and to try to understand these psychological barriers when we're working to alleviate poverty.
This leads to a pretty controversial topic: using shame to change behavior. I found Roelen's critique of these shame-based interventions very interesting. She talks about the community-led total sanitation, or CLTS, program in Zambia as an example.
Right. The CLTS program, while it wants to improve sanitation practices, uses public shaming as a tactic. Roelen has ethical concerns about this approach. She says it could be harmful, especially for vulnerable communities.
She describes the walk of shame, where villagers are shown the harsh realities of open defecation to try to motivate them to change their behavior through humiliation. Isn't there a risk that these tactics could backfire, leading to resentment and pushback instead of real change?
Exactly. Roelen argues that these approaches based on shame can be counterproductive, potentially making existing inequalities worse and causing psychological harm. Instead of creating lasting change, they can make people feel resentful and ashamed. People may even be less likely to ask for help.
She also draws a parallel with school lunch shaming in the U.S., where kids are publicly humiliated for having unpaid meal debts. It seems ridiculous and mean to punish kids for something that's often beyond their control.
Absolutely. This practice, which unfortunately happens in many schools, shows the dangers of using shame to control people. It makes kids feel helpless and can have long-term negative effects on their self-esteem and how they interact with others.
These examples really show how using shame as a weapon can make existing vulnerabilities worse and make it harder to effectively address poverty. So instead of using tactics based on shame, what does Roelen suggest we do?
She advocates for interventions that put empathy, respect, and understanding first. She suggests we stop shaming people and instead focus on tackling the root causes of these behaviors, which are often lack of resources, education, or support.
It's about recognizing that people are more likely to change their behavior when they feel supported and empowered, not shamed and excluded.
Exactly. Roelen's message is clear. Shame isn't an effective tool for changing society. We need to create environments that encourage dignity, understanding, and a genuine desire to improve everyone's well-being.
It's about shifting our focus away from blame and judgment toward compassion and working together to solve problems. Now, let's talk about the role of aspirations in dealing with poverty. Roelen introduces Abrahet, a young girl in Ethiopia. She dreams of becoming an engineer to help her community. It's a really powerful testament to how the human spirit can still envision a better future even when facing adversity.
Abraham's story shows the power of aspirations to fuel hope and resilience. But Roelen also warns against putting too much emphasis on individual aspirations without addressing the systemic obstacles that limit opportunities.
Okay.
She talks about the window of aspirations and explains how poverty can limit the range of futures that people can imagine.
It's as if poverty itself shrinks a person's imagination, making it hard to dream beyond their immediate circumstances.
Exactly. Poverty often means limited access to positive role models and experiences, which makes the possibilities people can envision for themselves much narrower. It creates a window of aspirations that's significantly smaller than for people from more privileged backgrounds.
It's like trying to build a skyscraper, but having very few materials. The foundation may be strong, but how high you can build is restricted by the resources you have. So how can we balance the importance of aspirations with the need to address systemic barriers?
Roelen says that encouraging aspirations has to go hand in hand with creating supportive environments that provide access to education, opportunities, and resources. It's about helping people dream big, but also giving them the tools and support they need to make those dreams happen.
So it's not just about encouraging people to have big dreams.
No.
It's about giving them the resources and tools they need to actually achieve those dreams.
Exactly. Now, Roelen talks about a promising approach to tackling poverty: cash transfers.
Okay.
She shares the story of Kandanani in Malawi, who, despite her struggles with poverty and HIV, sees hope for her grandchildren's future.
Kandanani's story is really powerful. It shows how cash transfers can provide a safety net and create hope. It's not just about meeting immediate needs.
Right.
It's about empowering people to invest in their future and create a better life for themselves and their families.
Exactly. Roelen outlines how cash transfer programs are becoming more popular around the world as a tool to fight poverty. These programs, which give regular cash payments to people with low incomes, are gaining traction globally. She talks about how effective they are in improving food security, health outcomes, and economic independence.
It's interesting how a simple intervention like giving people cash can make such a big difference.
It really is. Roelen emphasizes how cash transfers give people back their dignity and allow them to make choices that fit their needs and goals. It's about giving people the power to help themselves, not just handing them a solution.
This brings us to another common misconception about how welfare money is spent.
Yeah.
There's a stereotype that people receiving welfare waste money on unnecessary things.
Right.
I'm curious how Roelen addresses this deeply ingrained belief.
She tackles this harmful stereotype directly, explaining how spending on appearance can be crucial for maintaining dignity and avoiding stigma. She shares Linda's story. Linda is a woman who's embarrassed about her missing teeth and tries to hide them.
Linda's experience shows how even small expenses like dental care can affect self-esteem and social inclusion. It reminds us that judging how people spend money without understanding their situation can perpetuate harmful stereotypes and lead to wrong assumptions about how people in poverty use resources.
Exactly. Roelen stresses the importance of challenging those assumptions and recognizing the different needs people living in poverty have. What might seem frivolous to some can be essential for others, especially when considering the psychological impact of poverty.
This brings us to her critique of conditional welfare programs, which place strict requirements on those who receive help. She shares Wendy's story from Australia. Wendy faced challenges and humiliation while navigating the Job Active program.
Yeah.
It seems odd that programs meant to help would impose such difficult requirements.
Wendy's experience exposes the flaws of the nothing-for-nothing thinking behind conditional welfare programs.
Right.
These programs often create bureaucratic hurdles and don't consider the complex realities of poverty. They end up reinforcing power imbalances instead of addressing the problem.
So these programs, instead of providing support, actually add stress and barriers for people already struggling to make ends meet.
Exactly. Roelen criticizes the often unnecessary and burdensome conditions placed on people receiving help.
No.
She argues that these conditions can actually prevent people from taking opportunities that could truly improve their situation.
It seems we've come to a crucial point in our conversation. We've looked at the psychological weight of poverty, the problems with interventions based on shame, and the flawed logic of conditional welfare programs. How does Roelen suggest we move past these ineffective and often harmful approaches?
She suggests a fundamental change in how we think. We need to move away from policing behavior and towards understanding the systemic factors that contribute to poverty.
So it's about recognizing that poverty isn't just a result of individual failures, but a symptom of larger societal issues. We need to acknowledge the limits of personal responsibility and focus on creating systems that empower people rather than punishing them for their circumstances.
Exactly. She emphasizes the need to shift from judgment to empathy, from punishment to empowerment, and from individual blame to shared responsibility.
This change in perspective seems crucial for developing more effective and compassionate solutions to poverty. But how do we actually implement such a big change in thinking?
Roelen suggests a combination of individual actions and changes to the system. On a personal level, she encourages us to challenge our own biases and assumptions about poverty, to listen to those who are affected, and to show compassion and support.
So it's about recognizing that everyone has a role to play in building a fairer society, and that even small acts of kindness can make a difference.
Absolutely. And on a systemic level, she advocates for policies that tackle the root causes of poverty, things like access to affordable housing, quality education, and living wages. She calls for dismantling the systems and structures that create and maintain inequality, and for restructuring our society to prioritize the well-being of everyone.
It's a call for a big change in our values and priorities, a shift away from focusing only on ourselves and towards a more collective approach where we recognize how interconnected we are and how we all have a responsibility to create a just and fair world.
You put it perfectly. Roland's work challenges us to not only understand poverty, but also to take meaningful action, both individually and collectively.
Well, it seems we've reached the end of part 1 of our deep dive. We've covered a lot, from the science of empathy to the poverty premium and the need for systemic change. What key insights should our listeners take away from this first part of our exploration?
I think the most important takeaway is that poverty isn't a personal failure.
Okay.
It's a complex issue that's deeply connected to inequality in the system, social conditioning, and psychological obstacles.
Definitely. Judging people without understanding their situation just perpetuates harmful stereotypes and makes it harder to find real solutions.
Exactly. We have to move away from blaming people and move towards understanding them. From punishment to empowerment, and from placing responsibility on individuals to taking collective action. Only then can we start dismantling the systems that create poverty and make a world where everyone has a chance to thrive.
That's a powerful message for us to carry forward as we continue our exploration in part 2.
So to continue our discussion, let's go back to this widespread idea that poverty is a personal failing. Roelen challenges this notion by showing us the systemic factors that cause and maintain poverty.
It's kind of like blaming someone for drowning when they were never taught how to swim, wouldn't you say?
Exactly. Roelen argues that while individual choices matter, we can't ignore the impact of structural inequalities, discriminatory policies, and barriers to opportunity.
So she's saying we need to change our perspective and see poverty not as a personal flaw, but as a result of this complicated web of social and economic forces.
Right. And she emphasizes that we all have the ability to feel empathy and encourages us to use it as a powerful tool for change. Empathy helps us look beyond judgment and see that we're all connected, regardless of our circumstances.
It's realizing that anyone, given a certain set of circumstances, could find themselves struggling with poverty.
Right.
It's a humbling thought that breaks down the idea of us versus them.
Exactly. It reminds us that poverty isn't some far-off problem, but a reality for many people, often in ways we don't see.
This brings us to a crucial part of Roland's argument, how poverty affects people psychologically. She looks at how scarcity and deprivation can affect thinking, decision-making, and mental health.
She introduces this idea of the cognitive tax of poverty. It explains how the constant stress of managing limited resources can reduce our mental capacity and make it hard to plan effectively.
It's like trying to solve a complex puzzle while juggling a dozen other things at the same time.
Right.
Your brain just doesn't have the space to focus properly.
This cognitive overload can lead to a kind of tunnel vision, making it hard to see long-term consequences or go after opportunities that require a lot of mental energy.
It's not about a lack of intelligence or drive.
No.
It's about the limitations caused by the constant pressure of not having enough.
Roelen believes that understanding this cognitive tax is really important for challenging that common misconception that people in poverty make bad decisions.
Right.
Because their decisions, while they might seem illogical from the outside, often make complete sense when you consider the choices they have and their immediate needs.
Okay.
She offers examples like those families in Tanzania who buy food in small amounts even though it's more expensive.
It makes sense.
This practice, while confusing to those with more financial security, is actually a way to manage scarce resources and reduce waste.
So judging financial behaviors, without understanding the context, can lead to harmful stereotypes and get in the way of addressing poverty effectively.
Right.
Moving beyond the cognitive impact, what about the emotional toll of poverty? I remember Roelen diving into the shame, the stigma, and the feelings of worthlessness that often go with financial struggles.
Yes, she shares some powerful anecdotes and stories of people who have carried the heavy weight of poverty. Poverty affects their self-esteem and well-being.
My experience in Haiti really showed me this. I met a woman named Swamen, and she felt so worthless.
Oh, wow.
She believed that she had no good qualities. It was heartbreaking to see how poverty had stripped her of her sense of self.
That's a poignant illustration of how poverty can create this feeling of hopelessness and despair. It speaks to the profound impact that social and economic conditions can have on a person's sense of themselves.
So it's not just about the lack of material resources, but also the erosion of dignity and self-worth.
Precisely. Roelen argues that if we want to build resilience and empower people to seek a better life, we need to address the psychological impact of poverty.
Okay.
She supports approaches that promote dignity, respect, and agency. Approaches that recognize the value inherent in every individual, regardless of their financial situation.
This brings us to an important point. The need to challenge the way we approach poverty alleviation, which is often punitive and judgmental.
It is.
Roelen criticizes the nothing-for-nothing attitude that's common in many welfare programs.
Right.
These programs often impose strict conditions and monitor recipients closely.
She argues that these conditional programs, even though they might have good intentions, can actually make power imbalances worse. They create bureaucratic obstacles, and ultimately, they undermine the dignity of the people they're supposed to help.
She gives examples like the Jobactive program in Australia, where people have to navigate this complicated system and meet all these requirements just to get basic support.
Right.
It's unbelievable.
These programs often miss the complexity of poverty and end up trapping people in a cycle of dependence instead of empowering them.
It's like asking someone to climb a mountain with faulty gear and no training.
Right.
The odds are against them right from the start.
Roelen supports shifting away from these punitive measures toward strategies that are based on empathy, trust, and an understanding of the structural factors that contribute to poverty.
Okay.
She highlights the potential of unconditional cash transfers, which provide a safety net without all those demanding stipulations.
It's about offering a genuine helping hand, not just a temporary fix.
Exactly. She shares inspiring stories about how these cash transfers have helped people invest in their futures, improve their well-being, and break free from poverty.
It's like giving someone the tools and resources they need to build their own path, instead of telling them exactly what route they have to take.
Right. These programs challenge the idea that poverty is caused by personal failings.
Okay.
They acknowledge that there are systemic barriers and inequalities that hold people back.
Roelen also criticizes the popular narrative of self-help, doesn't she?
She does. She argues that while personal growth is valuable, it's not the only answer to poverty.
Right.
She points out that self-help often puts too much emphasis on personal responsibility, overlooking those systemic factors and structural inequalities we talked about.
It's like telling someone to pull themselves up by their bootstraps when they don't have any boots.
Exactly. Roelen emphasizes the need to address the root causes of poverty.
Yeah.
She advocates for policies and programs that promote economic justice, equal opportunities, and a living wage.
It's about creating a level playing field where everyone has a fair chance to succeed no matter where they start.
Exactly. She urges readers to challenge that common belief that poverty is a personal failing.
Right.
To understand that anyone, given a certain set of circumstances, could find themselves struggling with hardship.
It's a reminder that poverty isn't about bad character. It reflects failures in the system and social injustices.
Indeed. And she reminds us that empathy isn't just a feeling, it's a call to action. She urges us to use our understanding to advocate for change and support those who are struggling.
So how does Roelen suggest we turn this understanding into real action?
She proposes exploring different models, like universal basic income or UBI, which would involve giving everyone a regular, unconditional cash payment.
This is a pretty radical idea.
It is.
It challenges the traditional view that work is the only way to measure a person's worth.
Right.
It recognizes the value of all contributions to society.
UBI aims to create a safety net that allows people to follow their passions, do meaningful work, and participate fully in their communities.
It's about recognizing that individuals have value, regardless of their job or income.
Right. Roelen acknowledges the challenges of implementing UBI both logistically and financially, but she emphasizes its potential to make society more just and equitable. And she stresses how important it is to redefine work and recognize the value of unpaid labor, especially caregiving and volunteer work, which are often ignored and undervalued.
It's about acknowledging the contributions of people who might not be part of the formal economy, but who are providing essential services and support to their families and communities.
These types of work, while essential for families, communities, and the economy, are often left out of traditional economic calculations and policy discussions. Roelen believes we need to shift our perspective and recognize the immense value of these contributions from those who engage in unpaid labor.
So it's not just about a paycheck, it's about the meaningful contributions we make to society.
Exactly. And this leads us to Roelen's call to action.
Okay.
She encourages readers to embrace empathy as a guiding principle in their efforts to address poverty.
She challenges us to move beyond passive sympathy and engage in real actions that support those in need.
She shares her own experiences with volunteering, highlighting how powerful small actions can be when many people do them.
It's a good reminder that we don't have to wait for big gestures or systemic overhauls to make a difference.
Right. We can all contribute in our own ways to creating a more just and compassionate world.
It's about believing that when we come together, driven by empathy and a shared commitment to justice, we can create a world that's more fair and caring. So what are some practical things people can do to be part of this collective effort?
She suggests things like supporting local charities, volunteering our time and skills, and advocating for policies that promote economic justice.
It's about recognizing that each of us can make a difference, no matter how small it might seem.
Roelen's work is a powerful reminder that poverty isn't something we have to accept. It's a problem we can solve if we pay attention, show compassion, and take action.
It's about shifting our perspective from judgment to understanding, recognizing those systemic factors that keep poverty going, and challenging that idea that it's a personal failing.
Right. It's about seeing the strength and resilience of people living in poverty, supporting their aspirations, and working toward a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
And with that, we wrap up part 2 of our exploration of Keetie Roelen's insightful work on empathy and its essential role in addressing poverty. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Keetie Roelen's The Empathy Fix. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it, exploring this connection between empathy and poverty?
It has. And now it's time to kind of pull it all together.
Okay.
To really highlight those key insights from Roelen's work that can change how we think about poverty and inspire us to take action.
So where do we start? What are the main takeaways for our listeners?
Well, first, Roelen debunks this persistent myth that poverty is a result of individual shortcomings.
Okay.
She carefully shows us the systemic roots of poverty, explaining how things like structural inequalities, discriminatory policies, and limited access to opportunities all contribute to and perpetuate hardship.
It's kind of like running a race, where some runners are given a head start while others are weighed down with heavy loads.
Right.
Individual effort can only take you so far when the system itself is designed to create unequal outcomes.
Exactly. Roelen wants us to change our perspective, to view poverty not as a personal failing, but as a consequence of this intricate interplay of social and economic forces.
And this shift in perspective leads us to another crucial point: the deep psychological impact of poverty.
Yes.
Roelen so eloquently explains how scarcity and deprivation can affect cognitive function, decision-making, and mental well-being.
She introduces this idea of the cognitive tax of poverty, explaining how that constant stress of managing limited resources can actually drain our mental bandwidth, making it harder to plan for the future or take advantage of opportunities that require sustained focus.
It's like trying to navigate a dense forest with limited visibility and obstacles everywhere.
Right.
Your path is obscured by immediate concerns. It's hard to see the broader landscape.
This cognitive overload can create a kind of tunnel vision, narrowing the scope of possibilities. It becomes difficult to imagine a future beyond those immediate needs.
And this realization is so important because it helps us understand why it's wrong to judge the financial choices of those experiencing poverty without considering their context.
It is.
Decisions that might seem irrational from an outsider's perspective often make perfect sense when you consider the constraints they face.
Exactly. Roelen urges us to look deeper beyond those surface judgments. We need to understand the realities of making financial decisions in the midst of scarcity.
This brings us to another important insight: the insidious poverty premium. Roelen reveals how individuals living in poverty often end up paying more for essential goods and services, for deepening their financial struggle.
It's a hidden cost of poverty that creates a vicious cycle,
Right.
making it so much harder to break free.
It's as if the system itself is penalizing people for being poor. It's a financial maze that's hard to escape.
It is. Roelen also highlights the deep emotional toll of poverty, exploring the shame, the stigma, and those feelings of diminished self-worth that often accompany financial struggles.
Right.
These experiences, often invisible to those outside the cycle of poverty, are a big part of what makes it so hard to escape.
It's like carrying an invisible weight, a burden of shame and judgment that can chip away at a person's confidence and spirit.
Exactly. And Roelen explains so well how internalizing those negative judgments and stereotypes can actually trap individuals in this cycle of self-doubt and despair, making it hard to believe in a better future.
And this underscores the urgent need to move away from a punitive and judgmental approach to poverty alleviation.
Yes.
We need an approach that is based on empathy, respect, and a true understanding of what people are going through.
Absolutely. Roelen critiques that nothing-for-nothing mentality that drives many conditional welfare programs, highlighting how they can create additional burdens for people and reinforce those power imbalances.
She argues for different approaches like unconditional cash transfers,
Right.
which provide that financial safety net without all the burdensome requirements or the damage to dignity.
Exactly. And she also encourages us to think differently about what we consider work, to acknowledge the essential contributions of people doing unpaid labor, like caregiving and volunteering.
It's about valuing all forms of labor, not just the ones that bring in a paycheck.
Exactly. Caring for our family members, volunteering in our communities, these are all essential contributions to society.
And these often overlooked forms of labor are vital for the well-being of families, communities, and even the economy. If we want a more just and equitable society, we have to value and support those who are engaging in this unpaid work.
We do.
This brings us to Roelen's powerful call to action.
Yes.
She inspires us to go beyond just feeling bad for people,
Right.
and instead to embrace empathy as a force for change.
She encourages us to find ways to use our time, skills, and resources to address poverty in our own communities, reminding us that even small acts, when multiplied across many individuals, can have a significant impact.
Whether it's supporting local organizations, donating to food banks, volunteering our time, or speaking out for policies that promote economic fairness.
Right.
We all have the power to contribute to a more just world.
Roelen's work is such a powerful reminder that poverty isn't some insurmountable problem.
It isn't.
It's a solvable problem that requires our attention, our compassion, and our action.
By embracing empathy as our guiding principle, we can start breaking down those systemic barriers that perpetuate poverty.
Right.
And create a world where everyone can thrive.
And to help you remember the key takeaways from our exploration of the empathy fix, here's a 10-point summary for you to consider. First, poverty is not a personal failing, but a consequence of systemic inequalities and those societal structures we talked about. Secondly, empathy is crucial for understanding and effectively addressing poverty. Third, the cognitive tax of poverty can hinder decision-making and limit people's opportunities. Fourth, seemingly illogical financial choices often have a hidden logic when you consider the context of scarcity. Fifth, the poverty premium forces individuals in poverty to pay more for essential goods and services. Sixth, shame and stigma can create that vicious cycle that traps people in poverty. Seventh, conditional welfare programs can actually be counterproductive, reinforcing power imbalances and undermining human dignity. Eighth, unconditional cash transfers provide a promising alternative, offering a safety net without imposing all those burdens and requirements. Ninth, it's crucial to recognize and value all types of labor, including caregiving and volunteer work. And finally, 10th, we all have a part to play in tackling poverty through individual acts of kindness, advocacy, and working towards systemic change.
Thank you for joining us on this really thought-provoking journey. Until next time, keep being curious and continue to explore the world with empathy as your guide.